and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. This is your weekly catch-up on everything happening in North Carolina politics, public policy. We've got a lot to cover today. Of course, joining us on the couch here at Carolina Journal, we have Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, always a great source of information and analysis. Also, David Larson, Carolina Journal's opinion editor, and Dallas Woodhouse from American Majority Action, North Carolina. Okay, we've got a lot going on right now. First of all, as we speak here on Thursday, it is the first day of early voting in North Carolina. We also have a brand new poll, Carolina Journal's brand new poll out Thursday morning with all the latest information on these horse races here in North Carolina. Let's kick it off first. Let's talk about the poll. One of the things that we're really seeing right now is former President Donald Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris really in a neck-and-neck race here in North Carolina, as they are in many areas of the state, within 1 percentage point. Donald Trump with a slight edge, but still within 1 percentage point. Tell me what you think.
The most interesting thing to me about this is that we get to the next result, which shows a huge lead for Josh Stein, but it doesn't seem to have hurt Donald Trump, despite the fact that Democrats are trying to hurt Trump by tying him to Robinson in this state. You've seen a bunch of ads saying, showing clips in which Donald Trump, as he has for many people, saying great things about people he doesn't necessarily know all that well, but saying great things about Mark Robinson and trying to tie the two of them together. But yet that hasn't seemed to have an impact. He's still leading Harris. He's a little bit higher in this poll than he was the last time around. That's a good sign for Donald Trump, who has already won the state's electoral votes twice.
All right, well, that is a good sign. What are your thoughts on the poll that you see?
I think here is the really important key. When I got the poll back, it had Trump by 0.8. On that day that I got it back, the Real Clear Politics average in North Carolina was Trump by 0.7, so right in that. Now, that's very close, but I think it is important to remember that Republicans, rather Donald Trump, never led the Real Clear Politics average of polls in either 2016 or 2020. On this date that our poll was released in 2020, the Real Clear Politics average had Joe Biden leading by 2.7. On this exact date in 2016, it had Hillary Clinton leading 3.3. I think if you talk to our pollster, I'm friends with other pollsters. I think pollsters will readily admit that they have not figured out the anti-Trump bias in the polls. Now, this does not mean they are attempting to do it. They are trying to get over it. They simply cannot get older Trump males on the phone, and we have systematically seen over 8 years the polls discount Trump by about 3 or 4 points. That is important. I believe it still exists, and that will color some of my answers as we go forward and look at the other the other results, because it will filter down into some other races.
Sure. What are your thoughts overall on the poll?
Yeah, I think, as you said, like last time, Trump had often trailed, but often the Republicans did pretty well. Otherwise, you'd see like generic congressional ballot, generic legislative ballot, and judicial. Often the Republicans would have a strong showing there. This is actually a pretty strong poll, I think, for Democrats on a lot of those other races. They were winning in the generic state legislative ballot, which I don't think they often get that. And then the Council of State races, the one at the top of the ticket there, Robinson, he was already behind a little bit, and then seems like he's really fell off after that CNN. That's going to be a hard race for Republicans, and some of them are counting it out. But even Jeff Jackson being up on Bishop and some of the other ones, it just looks like it was a pretty strong poll. And then yet to be seen what if it's going to be as close as these margins are. If the impact for voting out west, because sometimes there are races where Jim Blaine, who looks at a lot of this data, he was saying, in the end, the West is fairly Republican, and it's a 4,000 to 5,000 net vote advantage for GOP. So maybe they'd be better use of the resources to get those 5,000 votes in a city. But I mean, there are races that come down to that, like when Newby won by 401 votes.
Oh, absolutely.
There are really close times where 5,000 votes out west could make a difference. So it'll just be interesting to see with things this close and even some good polling numbers for Democrats what that'll mean.
So one
Yeah.
of the things. Oh,
Well, I can say here at American Majority Action, we're active in the western part of the state. I do want to say I thought the legislature passed a great package crafting rules that particularly help people that have been able to remain in the area, vote, alternate locations,
Right.
and they certainly eased the ability to request an absentee ballot and return it, no matter where you are. I'm a little concerned about I think people that are up there that desire to vote are going to be able to do so if they're still in the area.
Transportation's an issue, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
roads-
agree, but
yeah.
we've entered the multi-tart and assistant teams to help collect ballots. We're adding new places. I'm not saying everybody. I think for the most part that'll happen. I'm a little concerned about people who are average voters who are now out of state in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Columbia, South Carolina. We're trying to help them vote by mail. I will say this, and we're early in the process. So far, there had been roughly 50,000 ballots that had gone out in that area, and their return rate, what's coming back into the boards of elections, are not trailing in any significant way other parts of the state, number one. Number two, we just did a big call project in that area. We called about 14,000 homes. We were able to get a third of the people on the phone, which is much, much higher
That's more than I would have thought.
than we normally get in a normal situation. I think part of that is people
They're not in jobs, right?
they're not in jobs. Well, they're not in jobs, and they need to get whatever information people are calling on the phone. So I feel a little more positive about that. I think at the end of the day, it probably will decrease about the same for everybody, and probably be about a wash. So
Good.
I feel pretty good about
I did
that.
get a chance to talk to our pollster when we're talking about these poll numbers and how hard it would be really to poll statewide in a time like this, particularly with Western North Carolina. So our pollster said it took a little longer to get the right number of people, but that percentage-wise they were able to reach enough people that this became a fair cross-section. That said, Trump is leading by much larger margins in more rural areas of the state, and some of those were the hardest hit. Moving on to the Stein-Robinson race. This is what we're seeing right now with Stein and Robinson. Josh Stein, North Carolina's Attorney General, leading Mark Robinson, our Lieutenant Governor, 49 to 36%. What do you think the impact is for those down-ballot candidates? Do you think we're seeing a real impact from all that?
There's potentially an impact, but as you look down the list of questions that we asked, it's not as if every other Republican candidate is getting hit in the same way.
Right.
Mark Robinson is 13.5 points behind.
Sure.
And he has been getting lower and lower. He basically peaked in our poll at about 39% and never got above that as other candidates were getting more and more of the undecided people moving toward them. This time around, he drops. He goes from 39 down to about 36, while Stein continues to grow. But you're not seeing that in the other down-ballot races. We saw in the last poll in September that as undecideds were moving toward one candidate or another, Democrats were getting a larger share of that, so they were either closing the gap or in some cases taking the lead against the Republican candidate. But this time around, there doesn't seem to be that same pattern of more toward the Democrats. Sometimes it's more toward the Democrats, sometimes it's more toward the Republicans, and that doesn't seem to be having an impact on Mark Robinson, or vice versa, Mark Robinson having an impact on those folks down ballot.
Donna,
I'm sure Dallas is looking at this
Donna,
closely, too.
let's put a couple things on the record that I think are important.
Okay.
Mark Robinson is not going to lose by 14 points.
Okay.
That is not going to happen. Maybe 6, maybe 5, maybe 7. A whole lot of those are Republicans, and some of those will come home. Okay, it's just not how North Carolina politics works. Our poll shows Steve Troxler up by 7 points. He's traditionally been the most popular politician in the state of North Carolina, and he still only wins by
Commissioner of Agriculture,
7.
State Fair.
Agriculture.
of
So
course.
that's the way. Number 2, it is also important to remember that Republicans were the underdog in this race all along. They were going to be the underdog in this race no matter who the Republican candidate was, as long as it was a lieutenant governor. I remind you that if we go back, 1978, we changed the Constitution so the governor could serve a second term. If you go back to 1992 with Jim Gardner, we have had six consecutive lieutenant governors that have ran for governor. Okay, if you include Robinson,
Right.
if you include Robinson, and if you believe Robinson's gonna fall, out of those six, five have lost. Five have lost.
Really?
Okay, and let's
Only
remember
Bev Perdue.
only
wins.
Bev Perdue won,
And she served one term.
and she served one term, and she was the only female. But it's also important to note that Mark Robinson did not become lieutenant governor on the votes of Republicans alone. He had to win with a lot of Democrats. He won by 4 or 5 points. He had to win with a majority of unaffiliated that elected him lieutenant governor. And history shows that if you are elected lieutenant governor and you run for governor, you will be the nominee and you will lose the general election.
Interesting.
Out of those six that have run,
Right.
5 were their party's nominee. Only Dennis Wicker was not in 2000, lost to Mike Easley, and only one was elected, Bev Perdue. So we were the underdogs anyway. Now, obviously, Robinson's campaign has had some difficulties. We nominated somebody who is not a traditional politician. He's also a really nice guy when you meet him. He's also got a pretty good story. He's had a hard time telling that. Here, there are two fundamental questions of the election as we head to November 5th. In North Carolina, there are two central questions. One, where does Donald Trump land? It looks like to me he's going to win. I think he will exceed what he did in 2020, which was 1.3.
Right. Narrowest by all of the
Narrowest,
Yeah.
well, the last two elections
Sure.
were the narrowest Trump victory.
Right.
I think he may very well exceed what he did in 2016, which was 3.6. Not by a lot,
Okay.
but we'll see. That's number one question. Number two, the Democrats have decided that every Republican in the state of North Carolina that is running from Congress to dog catcher should be sullied and slimed because they happen to be Republicans, and so is Mark Robinson. I think this is an overreach. The voters will decide. It could be one of the biggest failures in Democrat strategery, as we used to say, in a long time. We'll see. I mean, I think the North Carolina voters are pretty fair, and they're not going to blame Lori Buckout running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District because she happened to have a picture with Mark Robinson for things that he done, that he may or may have not done that are unique to him. So those are the fundamental questions.
Sure.
Because every single ad you see going against a Republican candidate somehow brings in Mark Robinson.
Yeah.
Is that, if it's effective, it's going to be a great night for Democrats.
Sure.
We'll have to see.
Yeah,
And I think the candidates who are most likely to be effective, if any are the ones who really leaned into the Robinson connection, because there were some that did. But as Dallas mentioned, there are some who may have had a photo
had a
taken
photo
at him at a GOP event, and that's it. That's their only tie.
Yeah. And I would just say this, that right now, we look like we're going to have two sure winners. Steve Troxler for Ag Commissioner for the Republicans, maybe Josh Stein for Governor. And if you play out the odds, most of the time, the incumbents win in this thing. So you like Mike Causey's chances. You like Elaine Marshall's chances. I just remind you that Elaine Marshall has been Secretary of State since none of us had a cell phone.
Right.
None of us had sent a text message, and we barely knew the internet.
And she beat Richard Petty.
And she beat Richard Petty.
That's hard to beat.
But on that, if you're Dan Bishop and you're down 2.5 points, if you're Hal Weatherman and you're down 2.5 points, and by the way, there does seem to be some amount of voters that believe voting for a Democrat for governor and a Republican for lieutenant governor helps balance things.
Right.
But if you're 2.5 points down, and as I talked a little bit, you think the polls probably undercount Trump, you're not in a bad position. You're not in a bad position.
And
now,
for that,
but I wouldn't feel if I was in a bad position about Jeff Jackson or Miss Hunt either.
Sure.
But any of those races can still go either way.
Well, an important point to make in that, if you want to follow along at home, of course, you can go to carolinajournal.com, click polls, and you'll see all of the results and the crosstabs there on that page. If you look at all the DMAs, all the geographic areas, Republicans are actually leading in all of them, with the exception of Robinson. He's only leading among rural areas. Republicans are leading in every race except for Raleigh.
Yeah.
So Raleigh is really driving this slight edge that Democrats seem to have in a lot of these Council of State races.
And meaning the Raleigh area.
The Raleigh area.
Yeah,
They
the
call it
whole
a DMA,
Raleigh, Durham,
demographic market area.
Yeah.
Tell me what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I think there's this narrative of urbanization,
Sure.
and we're one of the top states for people to move to after Texas and Florida. I think
Yeah.
we're number 3, and a lot of these people are moving to
the
the
Triangle.
Triangle area.
Yeah.
So you see over time, there's a map that shows Wake County being pretty red, other than Raleigh, and then over time it's gone
Right.
bluer and bluer and bluer, and the general area too, like Durham and Chapel Hill, all those are turning just bright blue.
Sure.
So I think that with population growth, if so much of it is there and so much of it are people maybe moving from New York or California and bringing
Right.
a little bit of their
Coming
politics.
to the Triangle, yeah.
Bringing
of
some
course.
of their politics with them. That's going to have an effect. Now it's yet to be seen whether that can. We are also a state with a lot of a rural population. That there's not a lot of states that have as high percentage-wise of a rural population as we do. So
Donna,
we have
I gotta jump in here with my
that
man.
up.
I gotta
Yeah.
jump in here with my man here, and I gotta be careful.
Okay.
I write for Carolina Journal, and this is my editor, so he can really embarrass me. Now, I'm gonna disagree with my man a little bit here.
All right.
Now,
What you
he's
got?
right about this. North Carolina has the second largest rural population outside of Texas,
Okay.
and he is right. The Triangle has always been the most liberal part of the state. Not only is Wake County home of so
But
many.
is the growth making the whole
Well,
state
but
go
hold
that
on.
way?
But hold on. Now let's
Yeah.
remember now. What you hear is Wake is growing, Mecklenburg is growing, Guilford is growing, and that is true. It is not true that they are the fastest growing counties in North Carolina. The fastest growing
Johnston County?
is, that's right, Johnston, Brunswick,
Right.
Iredell, Cabarrus. So here's what I think. I think if you go back to 2012, and we've had all these people move in,
Sure.
Republicans can point that we have had, and Andy Jackson, our colleague at CarolinaElections.com, does a great job tracking voter registration changes, which have gone for Republicans. If you add all that up, it's basically a wash over the last 12 years. We have more people, but we have the same electorate that on a generic basis leans 1 or 2 points to the Republicans.
I think it's hard to know where a lot of these people line because so many more of them are unaffiliated
That's
when
right.
they register.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
difficult. Some of them are splitting tickets and they don't really feel a strong affinity for either party. So tough to say. Where some of these people
That's right.
moving from New York,
Now, if I'm
they might
wrong-
actually be Republican. I meet a lot of Republicans.
If I'm wrong, you're going to get to correct me on
Right.
the next debrief. So, that's what we're going
Right,
to
and
do.
if
I
we
don't
are
think
going to
we
watch
really disagree.
Independent, if we are going to watch Independent, they're split right now: 44% Trump, 45% Harris. But 4% of them in our poll said they wanted a third party at a higher rate than anybody else. Let's talk. You just talked about all the different counties that we're looking at. This generic legislative, I think there's a very, very slight edge for the generic Democrat in the state legislature. That really surprised me. Isn't it the first time in a long time?
It is, and I went back and looked at the past polls that we've done, and remember that this Carolina Journal poll used to be the Civitas poll,
Sure.
and the Civitas poll conducted the poll before the merger of the Civitas Institute and John Locke Foundation. I went back to the time of the merger, and this is the first time since the merger that Democrats have had
So, like,
a lead.
3 or 4 years,
Yeah,
maybe?
so
Yeah.
so basically going back to
I
2021.
think this is probably a Mark Robinson effect.
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I
the
don't
state
think it's
legislature?
great. I mean, I think if look, they're down 1 point. I mean, basically, if in North Carolina, Democrats have to get, because of their geographic composition, they've got to get it like +4 or +5 to sort of be on an even keel. So Republicans aren't in a bad place
They
here.
might not have a supermajority, and with a Democrat governor,
Yeah.
that means their agendas.
Yeah,
hampered, so.
somewhat. I mean, if we're going to talk about the legislature, this is my personal opinion. I think there's a couple seats in the House Republicans are losing. There's a couple of seats in the House the Democrats are going to lose. It's probably going to basically be a wash. If they don't hold the supermajorities, they'll only be down 1 or so seats. It's not going to change a lot, in my opinion. But I think the key thing to watch is how do Republicans perform in early voting. Part of what I've done at American Majority Action is we've been tracking sort of absentee ballots, and conservatives really got on the wrong side and not liking early voting and mail voting in 2020 and still in 2022. And we can't compare raw numbers from 2020 to 24 because of COVID, right? And so many people voted by mail. But if you look at where we are at the start of early in-person voting, which is, we take this as today, if you look at just the number of requests of mail ballots, Democrats are down 10 points, Republicans are up 8 points. It is a plus 18 points for Republicans and conservative voters. It's just one data point, but it's a good data point.
Right. Well, and also we're seeing that early voting, people are more likely to say they're going to early vote.
Yeah, I think that is, we saw when early voting started, it was something that was really popular among Democrats. Republicans, being conservative, I think more of them said, hey, look,
Still an election day
let's
person.
election day. Let's go out on election day. We're not going to mess with this early voting. But as time has gone on, it's become much more of a thing that's common for both of the parties. Dallas's group has been working very hard to get people to vote by mail or vote in the early voting, because conservatives, just like their liberal counterparts, don't want to be chasing votes on election day. They want to make sure that all their people are out there voting so that they can concentrate on the marginal voters who might not actually go to the polls and get them to vote on election day, which could end up making the difference. But I think it's the case now that early voting is something that is very established, that is accepted by both parties, and that both parties are interested in doing that. And that's something that's going to be helpful to Republicans moving forward, that they aren't playing catch up on election day as they have in previous election cycles.
Sure. In this poll, we saw a jump. 53% in September said they were planning to early vote to now 58%. Yeah, that's a huge jump.
I've seen a lot of movement, like online. I used to see so much resistance to that. But that bank your vote, I think that was a Republican, in addition to
that's right.
to American Majority, the Republicans themselves have been pushing hard, bank your vote.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of people in the grassroots that often push back against the establishment and those kind of messages. Grassroots Republicans saying, no, get out there and bank your vote, because, as Dallas said in an op-ed recently, that allows your candidate that you favor to then take resources they were going to spend on you and direct those to somebody else. So you're kind of helping out your team by doing that, so the money can be best spent.
I think we're very likely to hit at least 60% of North Carolina voters vote in person early. Our poll showed that the number of mail people requesting maybe going up from 5 to 7. I believe we are clearly going to have the lowest percentage of people vote on election day we've ever had.
Okay.
And it'll probably be under 35%. I could see it being as low as 30. And I bring this up because in the long run, we are going to have to study and figure out how to manage our elections a little better. I mean, we open up all these voting sites on election day, which, to some degree we need to do, where less than a third of our voters are going to vote, and we push everybody into early voting with a tenth of the sites. I mean, somehow we're going to have to, sort of get the partisanship out of this and look, what is the best way to manage an election system?
And so, of course, jobs, what was it?
Right, inflation and prices are
Inflation
number
and
one
prices.
again at 32%, up from 30 last time around. If you lump in number 3, jobs and economy, which was at about 15%, together they're 46, 47%. And then the next big issue was abortion, which of course has been hammered by Democrats as their issue.
Look at yours. Take prices and inflation, jobs and the economy, and immigration, and add that up. What number does that?
If you add those 3 together, then you get almost 60%.
So you get 60% of the issues are favorable to Trump. The only issue that is clearly favorable to the Democrats is abortion at 16%.
But that speaks to how powerful these ads are. While only 1% of people think an ad is a good way to judge a candidate in our last poll, abortion went from number 4 on our list, because we haven't changed the list just for consistency purposes, went from number 4 to number 2.
But percentage-wise, it didn't go
It went
that much.
less than half.
And one of the things
Also, all that 16% are not Democrats concerned about the tightening of abortion restrictions, right? I mean, some of those are conservatives that think that that we have too much abortion access.
Right.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. A lot of folks who've been talking about this have said, okay, the abortion issue really gets the Democrats fired up.
Right.
Were they already not fired up? I mean, I don't think those ads fired them up any more than they already were. If they were fired up about this issue and saying, I'm going to vote no matter what, it was probably when the Supreme Court threw out Roe.
True.
And they're still dealing with that.
Can somebody at this table tell me what the Democrats in North Carolina are running on other than we need more abortions and they don't like Mark Robinson?
And they don't like Trump.
And they don't like Trump. Yeah,
That's
of course.
probably
I mean,
it.
I think that's it. But
I think
that's
public schools is their main issue because
Yeah, that's a big
they
one.
But they're
really
not
don't.
saying
They
it a
put an
lot.
emergency.
They
on-
haven't
yeah.
seen that as much.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're
that's a good
saying it
point.
lot.
Sure.
The
Yeah,
Mo
it
Green,
does seem to be their main
Yeah.
issue.
I think Cooper made that his banner on his official website that it's an emergency, and he kept it there. I believe even after Helene, he had it scroll
for a
above.
while.
Yeah.
For a while, yes.
Is Michelle Morrow doing better than you would have expected, or about the same?
I think she's still behind by quite
Sure.
a bit, and I think there's been a lot of mailers that have tied her and Robinson very tightly.
Right.
As Mitch said, some have only had a picture or two with Robinson, others leaned into it. I think she was maybe in people's minds a little more closely aligned with Robinson, so they're trying to really tie the two together, and maybe there's been posts from her
Sure.
past that were also a little controversial. So I think they've been a little more successful in taking her down than
Right.
maybe some of the other council of state.
Yeah, I was thinking
Let's remember there are 11. I think there are 11 statewide races. If you don't,
Right.
well, counting the
11
Supreme
county
Court,
Supreme
but not the appellate judges.
Sure.
Right now, Stein, Hunt, Jackson, Mo Green, Elaine Marshall ahead.
Yeah, right.
The Republicans for insurance, treasurer,
Agriculture.
auditor,
Ag.
and state Supreme Court.
Right.
Take state Supreme Court out, that's 9 races. What do the people that are leading in all 9 races have in common? They have spent a lot more
Yeah.
money than their opponents.
Well, and Josh Stein, though, now has the money to spend. I mean, he's
Yeah.
pushing some money
Sure,
down
he's
to
pushing money
Down-ballot.
down to the other caucus, but that's why that's what you worry about. I mean, I was amazed Chad Brown in our poll, who's a nice guy from Gaston County but not well known, is 2.5 points
Right.
within Elaine Marshall. But right about our poll comes, Elaine Marshall starts running ads. I doubt he'll be able to get up. That's where, at the end of the day,
money,
the Democrats are favored to win. An incumbency there with Elaine Marshall, and Morrow's got the problem is that she doesn't have the resources to compete with Mo Green.
Sure.
So money matters.
Yeah,
That
of
could be a
course.
problem of running against the establishment so hard in a primary, is that sometimes the establishment
have
has a
to.
lot of the money,
Right.
and if you've upset them too much, they'll sort of endorse you in sort of a half-hearted way and maybe not push as hard as
Right.
to
But
get
she
you across the
really
finish
tapped
line.
into something in that Republican base early on in that
Yeah.
primary. She tapped into it, and I think that's why we saw her able to upset.
Yeah,
Pruitt.
I think she did to some degree, but I think the bigger thing is Pruitt was the incumbent, and Republicans knew she had been a part of the school closures, and they didn't like that. And that's a bad place to be. Morrow's victory is obviously historic. The last time we had a incumbent council state member losing a primary, you have to go back to 1996, and it was John Brooks who lost the Democrat labor commissioner, and that's after the Hamlet chicken fire that saw 25
right.
people killed. I mean, it's a very rare thing, but it's often when you see somebody upset in a big primary
Which
that
school closures really did.
that party ends up losing in the general election. I don't think either. Here's a good thing for Republicans. The worst case scenario is not all that bad. They're going to pick up 3 congressional seats, maybe 4. They're going to win some council state races. They're probably going to do well in the courts, and they're going to
hold a majority at least.
They're going to
legislature.
maintain strong majorities in the legislature,
Yeah.
maybe or maybe not super majorities.
I mean, there's a little edge for Democrats.
And Democrats are going to have, I mean, neither party's going to be demolished. Democrats going to have the governor's race. They're going to have some other council of state.
Sure.
Basically, we're probably going to be similar to what we are now in the state of North Carolina. Big questions of presidency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dallas referenced this, but it's probably important to note this. The state Supreme Court race has been one
Right.
that Democrats have really focused on. They've been saying, look, we're down 5-2. This
Right.
has got to be the bottom. We've got to elect Riggs and then start our comeback to get the majority.
Yeah, they see it as a domino. Yeah.
And Republicans, while they would like Jefferson Griffin to win this race and give Republicans a 6-1 majority, it's not as critical to them because if they lose, it's status quo. They'll have the same 7 people next year as they do
Yeah,
this
but I
year.
don't think they feel that way. I mean, they've been fighting it hard and raising money. This is where Republicans have an advantage. I mean, whatever you think about Allison Riggs, she is for a political party that has sat around and cheered rioting and tearing down of downtown Raleigh or Minnesota or whatever, and Democrats will seem weaker on crime and justice, and that hurts them in judge races.
Sure.
We have seen that, and I think it's important to remember that since 2016 through 2022, if you look at partisan judicial races, because we had some anomalies in there, but partisan judicial races where there was one Democrat and one Republican, Republicans won 19 of 20.
Interesting.
So it'd be interesting to see if Democrats break that.
Right.
Yeah, and the point the point I was making before Dallas had the great insights there was that despite the fact that Democrats are focusing so much on this, Griffin's back in the lead.
Sure.
Yeah.
Riggs had the lead last time, but Griffin's back in the lead, so it could very well be a 6-1 Republican court. And if they win that race, plus the 3 appeals court races, it would be the 3rd straight election cycle in which Republicans sweep all the statewide judicial races.
Powerful.
Jefferson Griffin needs to pray for Trump to do well.
Yeah.
If you look at the judicial races in North Carolina, they track the top of the ticket pretty close.
Sure.
And if Trump wins by 2 points, 2.5 points, Jefferson Griffin will be a Supreme Court justice.
Yep. I want to squeeze this in, FEMA. So we've talked a lot about that. You and I have been talking a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, and certainly we had this in the poll. If you go down and you look toward the bottom of our poll, we did some, approval ratings and how people think that the government is handling it. It's interesting to me in this that folks in Charlotte were the least satisfied, but I think it's because they're seeing a lot of almost a refugee effect of people coming from it. Tell me what you
Also, they're
thought.
in the media market with the flood.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think after a big storm or disaster of that size, people really are looking for somebody to come in and help. And the idea, I think, we're now we look to kind of the big institutions. I think we're not as local focused, maybe in news and in a lot of areas as we used to be. So I think that was the expectation for a lot of people is FEMA is going to be here, and for a lot of people, they didn't really see FEMA. FEMA was handing out some money to people or having grants for roofs and things like that, but they didn't, on the ground, they more saw their local fire department and police department and some state ones, NC National Guard, actually like 18 other states too, I believe, also had National Guard here, and state emergency management, people like that. So, but they did not see much of FEMA, and I think there was definitely an expectation that they would have. So that, it's hard to get to what is it supposed to look like in a disaster.
Exactly.
So it's hard to know what was it supposed to look like when all the roads are knocked out, 5,000-year storm, nobody has phones, nobody has internet, power, water. So it's tough to know, but what people were expecting and how quickly they were expecting to see a response from federal government did not happen.
Right.
And whether that was completely reasonable or somewhat reasonable, I think, perception is reality a lot of times, and FEMA probably needed to do quite a bit more. And there's also a little tension feeling between when they did, some people come across them, and if state emergency management and FEMA were saying, only this helicopter can take off from this pad at this moment, only these people can go back in this area because it's a disaster zone. People didn't necessarily like that. They came to help, and they wanted, there was same thing with Starlink with Elon Musk. They had a little tension there.
They got a lot
People
of attention with
did
that.
not want to be kind of told where they could help and when they could help. So there's a lot of tension with FEMA. So I'm not really surprised that they were people holding them as responsible when they, did not have what they felt they needed to. And often, felt abandoned by them. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Donna,
Let me give 2 data points. One, a plurality of voters have a great 38% of people said they have a great deal of confidence in North Carolina's emergency authorities, which speaks to what you're saying about federal versus state and local. But 30% said they had no confidence, and two-thirds of voters, 62%, said disaster relief should be equally federal and state. I think it's really interesting to see how all these puzzle pieces have come together for North Carolina and whether it really the design goes with what people expected in a disaster.
Yeah, and I think also after you've asked people a dozen or more questions on partisan issues, then asking them these questions,
Right.
you ended up
Good
getting
point.
kind of a partisan split where Republicans were more likely to say they didn't think FEMA was doing a good job.
Right.
If it were the Trump administration, maybe it would have been a
That's
little bit
true,
different.
yeah.
The people who said, no, we know Trump's looking out for us. He's doing good. But I think after you've asked all those questions about Republican versus Democratic races, and then you get to the how is the state doing with the
Sure.
emergency response, or how is FEMA doing? People are still in that mindset of, this is a political poll. I should answer in a political way.
Yeah, Donna, let's bring the viewers in behind the curtain a little
Right.
bit. As we were sitting here before we started taping this segment, we were looking at, is this poll result even all that relevant right now? And I think we say that because I think all of us were really frustrated, and there's all kinds of misinformation and disinformation out there from all sides. I think a lot of it's been generated by people on the right that aren't helpful, and I think a lot of it was generated by the Biden administration. That seems to have calmed down. Now, all three of us, I don't know what you did in life, but all three of us, we're older. We've been out in these storms in North Carolina. My parents' home was virtually destroyed in the '96 Hurricane Fran. You and I have been covering Hurricane Floyd and boats and everything. This is so different. We're almost a month after the storm,
Right.
and we're still dealing with the immediate crisis. We're going to still be talking about this 10 years from now. This is going to be a long-term rebuilding strategy. I think it's good that the temperature on the relief has turned down. If we're probably honest about it, what probably is the truth there, that the federal and the state response was probably really good in some places and really, really difficult in others. So,
And that's the terrain.
and that's
the
just the
geography.
terrain, and that's
Yeah.
all these disasters.
Right.
And so now that it's kind of settled, I think that's good for the people of Western North Carolina. We have to come together and help these people. The truth of it is, there are going to be great parts of Western North Carolina that have a great depopulation issue.
Oh, sure.
I mean, when you have counties that aren't going to have water and sewer for 4 years, they're going to leave.
Yeah, I spoke
and we're
with-
going to have to work to get these people back.
Absolutely. I spoke with a group in Yancey County. We went out there earlier this week and found, or late last week, it's all blending together now, and they're not going to get power for 8 to 10 months.
Yeah.
Like they're
And
going to be
remember-
living
I don't know
off
how
the
those people
generators.
stay.
And remember, this is the time of year when much of that state is expecting people to come in and
it's
boost
cold.
their
Yeah,
economy.
and it's gonna get cold
they're
here
not
soon.
doing it.
And I would remind you that this week, Sugar Mountain had its first snowfall.
Wow. Now, I will say 90% of cell phone coverage is back up
Yeah.
in Western North Carolina, and I think that was a huge crisis.
Yeah.
Not being able to communicate with loved ones during that time generated this mass confusion. So having that is important.
I would just say on this being a tourism time, if you go on to Visit NC, they have created a map.
Okay.
It's interactive, and there's green dots, there's yellow dots, and there's red dots.
Oh,
For
good.
the green dots, the counties and the towns that have those dots are saying, please come, we are able to take visitors, there's roads in.
Right.
Yellow, they're saying, maybe call or get more information. Red, do not come. Most of the red is in Rutherford and Buncombe counties.
so helpful.
Everything
Good.
around it. The only problem is it's hard. There sometimes aren't roads, so they almost want people from Tennessee and Georgia and that
Okay.
area to come in easier than passing through Rutherford and
Sure.
Buncombe to get to some of these places. But if you can find a good way to get there without crossing through
Right.
a devastated
That's
area.
a great place to spend your vacation money
Yeah,
right now.
because they have the Christmas tree. If you can buy a Fraser fir from up in
Sure.
Boone area, like there's a lot of products and ways people can kind of use their money to support everybody. up
Don,
there.
I just want to say in the long term of this, and Elon Musk did, and you said some stuff about this, did so much with Starlink and got it there. But we have to pledge to never have our communities cut off the way they were for a week where we couldn't get to them, didn't know where they were. Whether we have to pre-position Starlink or find some other kind of technology, this can never happen again in this world.
That's a huge lesson to take
Yeah.
away from this event. All right, great. Well, thank you guys so much. This was a lot of information in a short period of time. Thanks for joining us on The Debrief. Make sure you check out carolinajournal.com for all the latest news and analysis on everything we've talked about here. And please get out there and vote. Thanks so much.